Hello there, and welcome to the English Language Club. It's Tuesday, so it's time for one of our weekly Hangout meetings. My name is Colin, if you don't already know, and this is Tony. Tony, how are you doing?
I'm doing pretty well, thanks. Good to be here.
Yeah. Funny how we try to look at each other, but we're actually in completely different countries. I'm in the UK, and Tony is in Canada. Yes, so thank you for joining us. I think we've got a few people watching already. So please do say hi. Let us know where you're from. And if you do have any questions, please put them in the chat. We don't have very many questions to go on yet from Discord. So we are relying on you guys who are watching to ask us some questions, and so we can help you learn English. Now, Tony, we did have was it one question that was Jack was asking, what is a mare's nest? And this is not a very common idiom, is it?
Yeah. So sometimes idioms are a bit funny because when I've never heard the phrase it was a mare's nest. A mare is a female horse, right? I've never heard that idiom before in use, but I immediately recognize what kind of where it comes from or what it seems like it ought to mean. If you way back in the day, especially if someone came up to you and said, I found a mare's nest, you would know maybe they thought they found a mare's nest, but they didn't, because mares, horses don't make nests, right?
No.
And so it immediately gives you that feeling of where you think you've discovered something really amazing and cool, but you really haven't. It's a mistake or a fake out or something like that. And I looked it up, and indeed that is where it comes from. Yeah, well, the OED says an illusory discovery. So something that you discover that seems really important and significant, but is just a mistake or an illusion. But apparently, over time, that is not the main meaning of a mare's nest anymore. And again, this is not a common idiom. I've never heard it in my life, but because I hadn't heard it, I looked it up a little bit. And apparently now a mare's nest is used either for like a really complicated situation or a really messy, kind of difficult to organize situation, which I imagine if a horse were to make a mess, it would be big and complicated and messy, right?
Yeah.
So idioms are a funny thing because oftentimes they mean something really obvious and clear and literal, and though not literal, metaphorical, but earthy. Like you can see the connection. But sometimes they mean something completely different, or over time they change, and different idioms become popular or kind of fade away. And this must be a good example of it because, like I said, I've never heard it. But it is an idiom that has existed for hundreds of years. Apparently, it's I wouldn't say medieval, but it's been around for hundreds of years.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's not an idiom that I am very familiar with and that I would use. I think I have heard it, and I guessed wrongly that it would mean something to do with a nightmare, a shortened version of a nightmare, which I guess is leading to a similar meaning, like a mess,
messy or horrible, right? Yeah. If you say someone's made a real mare's nest out of this situation, it would mean like that it's gotten too bad. It's messy and convoluted and no good. Maybe like a nightmare.
Or the old meaning that it's not actually real. Something that's not real.
Not actually real.
A nightmare is not real.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's an interesting one. Now we've got a few people watching. We've got Camis Hegacy. Nice to see you again. I hope you're still watching. Let us know if you have any questions. AJ in Monaco. You've always got some good questions. So let's hear from you. And Jincy John says hi. I don't think I've seen you before, so you're very welcome. Let us know if you have any questions. And if you are watching on Facebook, please say hi as well, because we are live on Facebook as well. But
hi. Oh, welcome, Vitaly. And I think I just saw Zahira on Facebook.
Okay, great. Oh, yeah, let me see. Yeah.
Well, while you're doing that, I want to just quickly jump in and say, nightmare is a really weird word as well. And I've been asked a lot, if nightmares have anything to do with mares, like female horses. This pops up in popular culture every once in a while. Like there's comic book characters called nightmares that ride around on these spooky horses and things like that. But it's actually way creepier than that. A mare is an old word for like a monster that attacks you in your sleep and sucks the life out of you. So a nightmare literally is like an attack by a soul-sucking monster while you're sleeping.
So the origin of like a nightmare, which now we just think of as a bad dream, was actually sort of spiritual and originally.
And like an attack. Yeah, you were being fed on by psychic vampires or something. And this fits with a lot of things like epileptic fits, a seizure. The word seizure comes from the idea of they thought something was possessing you. To seize means to take or take over, right? And so a lot of words for mental phenomenon, mental health things, but also just bad things like a bad dream come from these weird superstitious or spiritual terminology of being attacked by monsters. That's part of what gives the past this feel of like it was full of monster hunters and dragon slayers and things like that, because a lot of our regular words.
Well, I think that we as humans, we have had a tendency to label anything we don't understand as spiritual or supernatural, and now that we do understand a bit more, especially about psychology and things, we tend to do that less. Although people still do. Most spirituality, I think, is just a way of saying, "Oh, I don't understand that, so it must be supernatural." But anyway, let's not get into that.
It shows up in a lot of our other words too, like words like awesome and fantastic. Meant it literally casts a spell on you and makes you like deprives you of your free will. Like you can't act, you can't function because you've been fascinated. Means like you've had magic cast on you. So it's pretty crazy how many words in English come from these really like monsters and devils kind of terminology.
Great. Well, I hope you found that interesting. But let's move on. We do have a question from Zahira. But before that, just hello to Hassan, who's joined us.
You're welcome.
From Egypt. Living in Vietnam.
In Vietnam.
Great.
Nice.
Great. So here's Zahira's question. They say, what's the story behind the idiomatic expression to tie the knots as an equivalent for marriage? So whilst we're on the subject of
idioms,
maybe today will become an idiom-themed episode. So if you have any
I always
other,
like the idioms,
if anyone has any other idioms they want explained, Tony will probably be able to tell you the origin of them as well, and
most,
things.
not all, a lot.
No.
Like I had to look up mare's nest. I've never heard that one ever. Tie the knot.
Right.
I think the expression is tie the knot, singular. Not to tie the knots. And that actually it's very literal. It comes from an old, I wouldn't say English, maybe English, but British, like Irish, maybe Scottish, and some European Celtic traditions. There was literally part of the marriage ceremony. The bride and groom put their hands together, and whoever was doing the ceremony would literally tie their hands together with a rope and tie a thread, a cord, or something like that, and they would be bound together.
I think nowadays they do with a sort of a scarf type thing.
It's been different in many different cultures. I think the original is like there's a specific kind of cord that you use, and then oftentimes the couple would keep the cord, right? They wouldn't keep their hands tied together, but they would keep that rope or scarf or whatever and keep it in their home. And of course, this is older and cheaper than wedding rings because, certainly through most of history, most people probably wouldn't be able to afford at least very nice rings. But a cord or something to tie your hands together on your wedding or for your wedding. Yeah, so tie the knot literally comes from not the Catholic tradition, but older, I think, Celtic tradition of marriage ceremonies. And that's why you don't necessarily get this in all cultures, but in English, this idiom does exist.
Great. So I've got a question related to that, which we can talk about while we wait for some other questions to come through. So yeah, please do get your questions coming in, because we do want to have something to talk about. But related to weddings and marriage, I was driving past a church the other day, and it had a sign up about wedding bands. Do you know? So that is something. Now wedding bands are like, I think when people want to get married, it has to be sort of publicized for a certain amount of time that they're going to get married.
Oh, you mean bands without a D on the end?
Yeah, bands.
Bands, yes. Okay, yeah, of course, yeah.
Yeah. Now, is that related to tying? Or not? I mean, a band is sort of used to tie things, but it's not band, is it? It's band.
You mean a band without a B-A-N?
Yeah.
Right?
A
ban is an official church document in the Catholic Church. So the wedding bans are the modern equivalent would be a marriage license, right? That's the documentation that you have been married, you've received permission to be married if you needed to ask permission, and in most of medieval England, you did have to make sure you got permission, not because that your landlord could tell you no, but because there are certain taxes that you paid at important parts of your times in your life. Like if you inherited property, that was a time you paid one important tax. When you got married is another time you paid an important tax. So you had to register that you were going to get married because that was when you paid one of your major life taxes. And the church was usually one of the institutions that would kind of publicize it. So that it just comes from the fact that that's an official church document, like a letter that gets sent out.
And I think it's also to stop people getting married more than once.
Yes, that for the church, that's one of their reasons. They also, inheritance and things like that were always really important, even for very poor people. Even if you didn't have much to inherit, you still wanted to make sure that the right people would inherit. And so the way you do that is by keeping very detailed records of, who's married to whose children are whose. And when very few people could read and write, the only people who could do that was the church, the priests or whatever, who knew how to read and write.
Great. Well, Zahira, I hope that it was useful. I hope that answered your question as well. So let us know if it did. And if you have any follow-up questions, please do drop them in the chat. Now, we've been joined by Susanta, who's always got lots of questions, which is great. It's a bit of a relief because we don't have many questions this week so far. But we've got two from Susanta now. So here we go. The first one is, what's the difference between I have to do something and I will have to do something and I have got to do something? Ooh. This is right up our street because this is all about tense. And as some people will know, we've written a course called Inside English, which is all about making tense make sense. So let's have a look at this again. I have to do something. So tense is all about the auxiliary verb. So in this sentence, I have to do something. Is it?
So this is not like there's no auxiliary. This is present simple, right?
Yeah.
Have.
It's confusing because it has have, and that is what we use for the perfect tenses, but it's not really a perfect tense.
This one is not. The third one. The third one might be. It's hard to know. So this one is the verb have by itself. Can mean to possess something, but it's just used to describe something that's important or part of who you are. In this case, it's being used to say I need to do something, right? Yeah. So here the I need is the verb. To do is an infinitive, right? So the infinitive is here in all of these. To do or to eat, to take, to run. That's the infinitive. So
it's almost as if, though, have to operates a bit like a phrasal verb to mean need.
It is an important construction. Basically, you can have or need a thing, but if you have or need an action, it has to have the infinitive after it. So you're always going to
Yeah.
say with an action, I need to go. I have to do something, right? So that's an important construct. The have to, need to, I've got to, right?
Yeah.
The to technically goes with the word that comes after, but you will often see this after have or need or got.
Yeah. This is a strange. It is a strange construct, though, isn't it? Because it's not. It doesn't quite fit as a phrasal verb. It doesn't quite fit as a regular tense. I mean, it's present simple, but it's confusing because it has have.
Confusing.
So it is very. It doesn't quite. It's quite unique. This is one of the exceptions.
So it's not. It seems, and this is one of the reasons that the simple is so annoying, right? But really, what's happening here is this is exactly what infinitives are for. Whenever the object of a verb is a verb, you're going to use either the gerund, which is the name of that action with an ing, or the infinitive, which starts with a to and is the process of doing it. So you say, I am going to read. I am going to read, right? Or I like to eat, right? You can also say, I like eating, right? So anytime that the object of a verb is another verb, it's either going to be the gerund, ing, or the infinitive, to do something, right? And so that's what's really going on in all three of these examples. The object of all three of these is to do. And since do is an action, so you could, if it was a verb like, then you could say, I like doing. But for have, like I need or I will, you have to use the infinitive. So I have to do something. So I think that's breaking down what this means.
And I think one of the things that makes this confusing is because we often talk about this in terms of have to being an expression. I have to.
Yes,
but it's not. To is really part of the infinitive. So we're just saying have infinitive, not have to.
So
and I think that maybe creates a bit of...
Exactly. The phrase have to is an understood shortcut of recognizing that obviously we're leaving out the subject and we're leaving out the actual verb part of the infinitive, right? But have to is shorthand for this exact construction that we use a lot, right? Because we know what it means.
Yeah.
So now what about the difference between these
three? That's Susanta's question. She's probably saying, get on with it.
So the first two is easy. This is the difference between simple, present simple, and future simple, right?
Yeah.
I have to do something. The verb is have. Just like you could say, I have a headache, or I have homework. You're saying I have to do something, or I need to do something. You're saying that this currently, you're talking about now, right now, you have the need to do something. That usually means you're going to go do it, right? But it doesn't necessarily. But when you say I will have to do something, this is future simple. You're talking about some time in the future, which means you probably need to say when you're talking about. So if Colin asks me, do you want to play board games this afternoon? And I say, I will have to do something before I can do that. So I don't need to do it now, but this afternoon I have something I need to do, or I will have something to do before I can play board games. So will have to do something is explicitly talking about the future. I have to do something could be talking about the future because we use present tenses a lot to talk about the future in English, but it also could mean right now.
So this have to implies a sort of obligation. So it's a bit like a modal verb.
It is very similar. It's not a modal verb.
But it's not a modal verb, is it? No.
But it has the same role as a modal verb. It allows you to say I need or I must. Not need isn't as well, but I must do something. See, then you don't need the to do, right? I must do something because now the do is the main verb because must is a modal verb.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Now the third one is a bit trickier because it's present perfect. But again, we often use present tenses to talk about the future. Basically, if you need to do something now, all right, you've got to do something now, that implies you're going to do it in the future. The need exists now, which means the action of doing it is going to be in the future.
Now, we've talked in the past about how the verb get and got is the past participle form of get, right? That's a very strange verb. So, and I think that's why it's used here to talk about the future. So yeah, so in this case, have is the auxiliary verb, making it the perfect tense combined with the past participle form of get. So, but yeah, it's very similar. So, but is there a difference between have got to and have to?
So technically, you're saying that this has something that has happened. You now like, I lost my keys, and now I've got to go find them. The got to implies something is changing. Have got implies something in the past has changed, causing you to need something in the future.
Or now, or present, or the present.
Sorry, in the present, causing you to need something in the present. But that said, all three of these things can be used to talk about something you're going to need to do in the future. But two of them, the I have and the I've got, can also be used to talk about something you need to do right now, right? Or even something you are doing, like I've got to finish this, right?
Yeah. Now, present perfect is normally used to talk about something. Well, it's present, so it's talking about now, but it's always about something that's completed. So we're really talking about something that's happened in the past, but with an emphasis on how it's affecting the present. So I've got to do something that I think would mean that the time when you started needing to do something is in the past, but you still haven't done it. You still haven't done it, so you still need to do it. Right. Whereas you could say, I have to do something that might mean you only started right now to need doing it.
Yes.
Like, I have to go at 4:00. Well, it's 4:00 now. Or you could say, I have to go at 4:00. And then that's talking about the future. Yeah. Or no, I mean, so, if assuming that 4 is in the future.
Right. So all of that, so like these are slight differences between them. I'd say the biggest difference is, again, will have means you are for sure talking about the future.
Yeah.
The other two you could be talking about right now. But that said, the will have, I will have to do something is not super common. Most of the time, if someone says, do you want to come over for dinner this evening? You say, no, I've got something I've got to do. You don't usually say the will to be future. So that middle one is not as common. You don't normally need to use it. And the other two, basically, these are common enough sayings, people use them interchangeably. Yes, there's a little bit of difference between them, but most of the time, people use them for the same thing. Like, I have to do something and I've got to do something. There's a subtle difference. Whereas with I have got to do something means something happened in the past that caused me now to need to do something in the future. But the reality is people use them for the same thing. And they don't really use number 2. I will have to. But yeah,
great.
That was a very complicated answer. But
yeah, I think we need to move on because we do have quite a few more questions coming in now. Although that is, that was right up our street, so we could probably talk about that for hours. But I think we do need to move on. Yeah. We do have a few more questions. A few more from Susanta and one from Hassan. So we will get to those. But and also one from Vitali. But we're just working our way down the list from the beginning. So. Let's see, where did we get to?
1-0 for Susanta. This question.
Yes, 1-0. So nil means 0. Is that from Latin or?
Well, nihilus. Nil in Latin means nothing, not 0. But yeah, it's
right.
Very
yeah,
intense.
because you also have like the phrase in medicine, or you have the phrase nil by mouth, which means somebody can't eat anything through their mouth. So yeah, nil, it means nothing, but most of the time we talk about nil, it's in sport.
In games, not just sports, but in games, nil is commonly used to mean 0. For example, in games, card games, dice games, not just sports, but obviously sports as well. So in
football or soccer, for example, 1-0 would mean one team's got 1 point and the other one's got 0. Simple as that. I don't know why they don't just say 1-0.
Well, there are some reasons, but I'm not sure if any of them are. The reason now is just tradition, right? Like, why are points in hockey called goals, but points in baseball are called runs? Well, why don't they just call them all points? Well, tradition.
And why do they say love in tennis? 15 love.
You know, that one I don't know.
Anyway.
I've never really watched tennis, but tennis is again, the scoring system. That's true for all games, right? Like, why they call the scoring system the way they do. Sometimes
they each have their own. Each one has its own story.
Exactly. It's all about.
But so yeah, I don't think we need to dwell on this.
No, nil means zero. Yeah. In games.
Yeah. Okay. Still with Susanta. What does? When do we use the modal verb might? So, might is a modal verb to indicate like possibility. So
kind of when it's sort of even, like could go either way.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So if you're not sure, uncertainty. I might be there by 3:00, but I might not.
So if you think it will happen, you say I'll probably be there, or I should be there. Or if you think it's not very likely, I may be there, or I could be there. But if it's sort of in the middle is when you usually say might.
Well, also, I think if you say I might be late, that's not in the middle. That's maybe a 20% chance you're going to be late.
And that's true for all of these. Like all modal verbs can technically be used almost no matter what the level of likelihood is. But they do kind of have sort of a hierarchy of where they are. And might is right about in the middle. But again, you know, people would say, well, yeah, maybe, which is the same thing as saying might. Maybe anything can happen, right? And it's true. So you can use might even for things that will almost definitely happen or will almost definitely not happen. But again, that's true for almost all the modal verbs. Like it could happen. You know. Vitaly is telling us where love comes from. It comes from French for egg, mispronounced horribly. And an egg is a 0. Yeah.
Right. And
people also say in games like goose egg for 0 and things like that. So
okay. And Jack is in there. He's saying that they use nil in cricket.
They use it in a lot of games. Not as common in like purely American sports like American football or basketball or baseball. In American English, it's used more commonly, I would say, in card games. But you do hear it sometimes in other sports.
Well, one of the things about American English is it is more literal. So there are less. I think you have fewer of the. I think you've let more of the sort of French words and things fall out of use.
Not necessarily, but the ones that have a much more easily understood alternative, a more mainstream, a more literal interpretation. For example, in English, the main way you say a 0, outside of saying a 0, is O, right? So it's 1-0, right?
You're talking about the number,
in sports,
If you're reading your phone number or something.
No. I mean, if you want to say 1-0 in English, in American English, you'd more likely say it's 1-0. Than nil, because nil is slightly less literal. O is still easier to say. It fits more nicely in casual things than 0. But it's also super literal about what you mean.
Okay. So I hope that helps with the modal verb might.
Again, modal verbs a huge topic. We could talk about that for a long time, but it's also very slippery. There isn't hard like this is when you should use it. This is when you should use this one.
Like for example, may and might. I'm sure there are differences, and there are probably people who could talk for hours on those differences.
And argue that we're wrong.
In reality, exactly. But in reality, if you were to do a Venn diagram of when they're actually used, the two things would overlap.
They're very close.
For the 95% or something.
In fact, I would say might is probably the most flexible and the most commonly used modal verb, aside from the can, because can is different. But like the ones that represent how likely something is to happen, might has a huge range and is probably the most commonly used one.
But then again, may has other uses because that can be used for permission as well. May I go?
If you're just talking about how likely something is to happen, and most modal verbs can be used for that, right? Then might is the most generic, because might can't really be used for anything else. But others could, would, should, may all have other meanings as well.
Yeah. Interesting.
Mhm.
Okay. We've got a couple more from Susanta. What does early on mean? For example, it can start early on. Early on. So it's very similar to just being early.
Well,
but
the difference between early on implies like early in a specific set of time. So you might say this,
Yes.
this happens early on in the stage in the
movie,
this disease, or early on in the movie, or early on in the book. So early on means in a defined period of time. It happens towards the beginning.
We normally do the questions from Discord early on in the live stream.
Exactly. Whereas early by itself means either like in the day, usually, or something like early in a broader sense. Early on means within. So it was like we talked about that early on in the convention, or in the live stream, or in the movie, some defined set of time.
Yeah.
Like we started early doesn't mean we started early on in the set of time. It means you started before the set time, right? Yeah. So that's the difference.
Or the set time was early in the day,
or the set time was early in the day.
Set time. Yeah. But yeah, interesting. I hope that's helpful, Susanta. But we've got a couple more. So what does conceivably mean? Conceivably. So it comes from to conceive.
So there's a funny there's a movie, The Princess Bride, where there's a character who constantly says inconceivably, and he means like it's inconceivable. He means that he thinks it's unlikely. But the word inconceivable means you couldn't even imagine it. Conceive here means like to create. So you couldn't even create the idea in your head. Inconceivably.
So the word
means
conceive means
imagine,
to come up with an idea or imagine.
Right.
Yeah.
So conceivably means, yes, I can imagine that being a reality, right? Like, faster than light travel is conceivable because you can come up with an idea about it. Something that's inconceivable is so far-fetched, no one would ever even imagine it. So conceivably just is like the most broad possible, like not even is it possible, but could you even come up with the idea? Well, obviously everything that anyone has ever thought is conceivable.
Yeah. Great. Okay, well, thank you for the questions so far. We're going to keep going. But if you are watching and you are enjoying yourself, please do give us a thumbs up and make sure that you're subscribed if you're not already. And then you'll be notified when we release videos and do other live streams. Where are we up to now then? I think
very. To Santa's question, what does very mean in very many different locations?
Yes. Is that the one?
No.
Oh, no. Sorry. Yeah. Yes. What does very mean in very many different locations?
So very just is a kind of intensifier, right? If something is good or it's very good, right? So if there are many of something, or there are very many of something. So many means a lot. Very means a lot. So it just means more than. Very many is more than just many. But both of those are vague. They don't tell you exactly how many. It just means
so
more.
in that sentence, you could equally say in many different locations, but to just be more to emphasize it, to stress that it's lots of different ones, we just say in very many. Yeah.
Yes.
But the sentence works without very there.
Yeah.
Okay. Great. So Zahira on Facebook says, linking in pronunciation is important for fluency. Could you give some tips to recognize areas where one has to link words to sound fluent?
This is another one of those questions with a very simple answer, or we could talk way too long about it. Linking is when, we talk about this as assimilation. Two sounds, when they're pronounced together, change slightly so they fit more nicely. Well, linking is just that with words, two different words. And the rule in English and in all languages, but English is just, it changes faster, so it's more obvious. But the rule is if two things are hard to say together, they change to make them easier to say. It's always the rule. It's always the way it works.
And when you say they're hard to say together, you're talking about, physically difficult to move your mouth from that one position to the other. I mean, it's not difficult, but let's give an example.
It doesn't fit. Example, going way back is, if you were to try to say the word and then a word that starts with a vowel, like apple, you say apple, apple. It
apple.
It forces you to pause. You can't say it quickly. Apple. It doesn't sound right, and it seems kind of forced. And that's why in English the word before a vowel always changes to an apple. Now we can say that as if it were one word, very smoothly, very quickly. An apple.
And it's interesting how the spelling of an actual word or a new word has been invented because of pronunciation and specifically because of the physicality of the pronunciation.
And that's English in a nutshell. I mean, English just does this in so many ways. It borrows and it mutates to make things easier to say. Not easier to spell, unfortunately, but easier to say. So the key is if two words, and guys, give us some examples, like what you think two words that are hard to pronounce together are. But if you've got two words that together are hard to pronounce, English says you change them. Usually you soften a letter or you turn something into a consonant, this kind of thing. But that's the tip to when do you need to link words is when two words kind of clash. They don't sound right together or they're hard to say. It's hard to quickly move your tongue into position or whatever.
Just looking through that text that's on the screen now, I can see several examples. Like could you? We would often say could you. So the D and the Y sort of merge instead of stopping.
Yes, because the D forces you to stop in the middle of the sentence, and U forces you to kind of blow out. So you combine them. Do. Yeah. Right. Another one is
now. I'm sure that somebody has codified this and said after if there's a stop sound and then this certain sound, then they're linked. But you just I don't think that it's helpful to sort of learn that. It's helpful it's interesting to study it if you're studying phonetics. But if you just want to improve your pronunciation, I think a more organic way of absorbing this sort of thing, and like I said, it should sort of come naturally because it does all evolve from what is easier.
Yes,
so
it is.
So that's why I haven't studied that's why we at English Language Club, we haven't sort of studied the codification of when you do it, because I think it's difficult to learn that and not very helpful because it doesn't result in better pronunciation.
Right, because it's not like memorizing a list of when to use, when to soften or whatever is not going to help you unless you practice every single one of those words that fit that pattern. Because you can practice them without knowing the code. Yeah. Right, your brain is going to learn this by doing it and by hearing it. Like even Zahira brought the example law and order. Again. You almost pronounce law and as one word. Law and order.
Law and order,
yeah. In the first two words, linking in, both have a very similar last sound. So you pronounce them as if it was one word. Linking in. The nin as if the ng was part of the beginning syllable of the in, right? So it's yes, the when to look out for it is when you say two words and you're like, oh, that was really hard, or it sounded off, or they clashed, those sounds clashed. That's when you know that you're probably supposed to be linking. Yeah. Good question. And I think the simpler answer is the better one there, rather than trying to memorize lists like Colin was saying.
Yeah. Okay. Another question from Susanna. When should we use preposition before a verb? For example, He earns money by selling food, or he earns money selling food. So when
first,
do we
both
say
of those are fine, right? He
Hmm.
earns money by selling food, or he earns money selling food. And they mean the same thing.
Yeah. So what's the difference?
So the difference in this, so this is, we could talk about this specific example or talk about it in general, but in this specific example, this is a good situation where English drops out words that seem unnecessary. The by there tells you that what comes after is telling you, how the main verb works. He earns. How does he earn? Well, by selling food. But if it's obvious that that's what you're saying, he earns money selling food. If you needed to say something that didn't sound obvious, like he earns money for selling food, well, that wouldn't be obvious. So you'd need to say for, right? He earns money and he also is selling food. Well, that again is not obvious, and you need to explain it. But if it's obvious, the selling food is how he earns money, then English will often let you drop out the preposition. A lot of times this is the case with prepositions. People are like, well, why is the preposition sometimes there, sometimes not? Because English allows you, though doesn't usually require, but it allows you to drop out prepositions and other short words when it's kind of obvious. You don't really need to explain. Like we say, he drove, I'm walking the path up to the lake. Well, you don't have to say I'm walking on the path or I'm walking through the path or whatever. You can just say I'm walking the path because it's obvious what the relationship between you walking. Now, if you're going to say something that's not obvious, like I decided to walk beside the path, well, now you have to say it because it's not obvious, right? So that's a general good rule about prepositions, is they often can be kind of dropped if it's obvious.
Yeah. So the full use, the full correct form is with by, because it defines the verb almost. But because it's so obvious, we can leave it out. But I think as a result of that, if you're writing something more formal, you tend to you keep the word by. Would you agree with that?
Often. I don't know about in this case, but often, yeah. Formal language is often about not dropping things, not using contractions, not leaving things as understood. That's often the case about formal language.
Yeah. Great. Okay.
Yeah, good question.
So we've got a few more questions. Next one from Hassan. I think we are going to have time for a couple more questions. So if you do have anything, feel free to put them in the chat still. But Hassan says, what is the definition of conjunction?
So this is another one where I think you will get different grammarians and linguists arguing over what does qualify as a conjunction. But the simple answer is, you even look at what it means. Like conjunction, junction is where two things connect. Con means with. So it's a place where two things connect. A conjunction is any word that is used to connect things, right? The most common ones are and, but, and or, right? They're used to connect things, either in a list or used to connect pieces of sentences, right? Like I like pizza and ice cream, or I brushed my hair and trimmed my nails, right? Those are conjunctions. There's also lots of different words that some people will say, oh, these are conjunctions, they're pronouns, this kind of stuff. But they're words that are used to link things, to connect them, are conjunctions.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Again, this is the sort of thing where I just don't. I mean, I know that this does come up and it is considered important, but I think a lot of native speakers, they won't know what a conjunction is.
Or they'll just say, oh, and, but, and, or, and they won't think of
although,
they might, through, or who, or whatever.
Yeah, and they might guess, but it doesn't really. It's useful information, or it's not. It's interesting information, but it's not necessarily useful for helping you communicate, because these are the kind of words that they're so common and so useful that we just sort of know them more instinctively. We develop an instinct for them quicker, and they normally have direct translations, so they're quite easy to understand.
Now, if you're studying conjunctions, it's probably because you're studying complex sentence structure. And that is important to understand the different types of conjunctions and how they're used. I'm not going to go into that because that wasn't your question. That's the only reason that you need to study conjunctions generally is if you're studying more complex sentence structures, which is a great way to show off your improved English. If your English is at that level that you can use more complex sentence structure, it is a really good way, especially in writing. But again, that's something that it's a little bit more advanced. And again, most English speakers that aren't professional writers don't really think about it, or not necessarily professional, but that don't do a lot of writing.
Yeah. Okay. So hope that's helpful, Hassan. Thank you for waiting so long for us to answer the question. But yeah, I do hope that's helpful. Let us know if it is. Vitaly says, when would you not use be and get interchangeably in passive structures? So I think
the
we
bank
need to
was
explain...
robbed or the bank got robbed, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when would you not use it interchangeably?
So technically, get is used when something is changing. Definition of changing can be tricky, but when something is coming into someone's possession or leaving someone's possession, or a time period is changing, or an object is changing from one thing to another. For example, I was tired. That's not really passive. But for example, to show the difference, I was tired and I got tired mean different things. They're not the same, right? I was tired. You just were. You were before, you still are, or whatever. You didn't say when you changed. I got tired means you're talking about the time you changed from being not tired to tired. Technically, that's your difference. So ask yourself, is it absolutely impossible for this either to be changing or to not be changing? That's when it's not going to be interchangeable. Or rather, where if it could be one or the other, and which one you use will change what it means. That's really your key problem.
And I think part of the confusion with this is that get gets used wrongly so often that it's become accepted. Like you could say like the house was being built, but you could also say the house was getting built, and technically that's not correct.
That's not technically wrong because building is a process of change, right?
Yeah.
We would not say the house is becoming, right? But building is a state of change. So the thing about get is like have and be, it is massively broad, and English has changed it over time to be more broad. So I do agree. Yes, get gets misused so often that it has become acceptable, but I don't mean like in the last 10 years. I mean like over the course of the last 500 years. But also, it's just really, really broad. So it's hard to use it wrongly in some ways because it also just means have, right? It doesn't. Its origin is become, but sometimes it does not mean become.
But there's also some confusion because be is auxiliary, can be used, is always often used as an auxiliary verb.
Right.
So was being built. That's because we're using it's continuous, but it's also passive. So for both continuous and passive, we need the auxiliary verb be. So it technically was being is be, just in different forms.
And was getting saves us from that. And that's, I think, the main reason that get is used in the passive is it saves us from the be being or be situation. And so oftentimes you'll see it used interchangeably just to avoid using be in an extra way. Now, this is similar to the do you use will or going to talk about the future? That sometimes you'll see lists, for example, of when one is correct and when the other is correct. That's not actually what's happening. What's happening is that one of them is more commonly used in certain ways, and the other one is more commonly used in other ways. But it's not always that one is right and one is wrong. So all that to say, Vitaly, I can't think of an example off the top of my head where they're not interchangeable. I did explain when it would be the case that using, like, if not changing or changing have very different meanings, and you want to be clear which one it is, then they would not be interchangeable, because you need to make sure you explain which one is which. But I can't think of an example of that in passive, just because the passive tense is almost always used to talk about something changing. Otherwise, you wouldn't need to use a passive. You would just use a descriptive, right?
Yeah. Great. Well, I hope that's helpful. It touches on so many things that we could probably talk about for hours, and we need to do some more research really to answer it properly. But
yeah, and one of these days we will be releasing a video or series of videos on
and actually we'll talk about that. We've got some more things to say about our future plans, but I think we've got time for, let's say, 2 more questions. Or no, actually, I think we've got a couple of questions that we can zip through very quickly. So Jack says Hyperborean, and then he's saying, is this a place or an ancient civilization in Europe? It's something to do with the north. Do you know this?
Well, Hyperborean just means northern. Hyperborean means the extreme north. The ancient Greeks used this to refer to a mythological place that was like up in the Arctic, but they didn't know about the Arctic, so it was more like, in the Russian steppes or something like that.
Right.
But if you're asking which modern country is Hyperborea, none. It's a mythological place. It was based off of rumors of people who traveled in what is now Russia or what is now Poland, but it's not a real place.
But literally,
sometimes you'll see people, hey, we picked
north.
this spot and we think this is Hyperborea. In the same way, people are like, oh, we think the Canary Islands are Atlantis or whatever. They're mythical places. They didn't actually exist. But yeah, it just means the extreme north. So you hear that word used sometimes, Hyperborean, to refer to things that are in the extreme north.
Great. Yeah. And next, so just moving on, we'll get through these as quickly as we can. Jack's also asking, what is an adjunct?
Do you mean in grammar? Because in grammar, it means words that are added to a sentence that aren't really necessary. You could take them out. Similar to a parenthetical, except it's less.
So things of secondary importance. So it says, I just Googled it quickly. For example, on the table in we left some flowers on the table. So you don't really need to say where you
actually a good example was earlier when Susanta said, in very many different locations. The very is unnecessary. It does not change the sentence grammatically at all, because very many means the same as many. It's just more emphasis. That's what an adjunct is. You just add something to a sentence. It's not really necessary, but so Jack is saying not grammar. So an adjunct is something that's added on or is less important. Like the most common you probably will hear is an adjunct professor. They're not a full-time professor. They're added on to the faculty, but they're not necessarily part of the faculty, and often they're seen as being not as important.
Right.
But you hear it all sorts of things, and primary adjunct to Unimatrix 1. Like it just means something that's added on. It's not part of the core.
Mm-hmm. So we've got 2 questions from Zahira, and then I think we're going to have to call that a day. Although, So we do have some announcements we want to make after these questions, though. So
great questions.
Fun. I feel like we've been really going at it today. So Zahira says, in Spanish, generally adjectives come after nouns, but in French and English, most of the time adjectives come before nouns. Are there instances in English come after nouns, and does this make a difference in meaning? So yes, so we would say in English, we would say the red car, whereas in Spanish, you would say the auto roja. Now, are there times when we can say the adjective after the noun in English?
Usually when it's not really an adjective. Sometimes I'm trying to think of an example, but not usually if it's an adjective. If it's a noun being used as an adjective sometimes, but not usually. Again, I can't think of an example off the top of my head. There are some, but it's not normal. It's kind of like how, for example, in French, actually, most of the time the adjectives do come after the nouns in French, but certain adjectives always come before the noun. So it's kind of there are some similar situations in English, but in English, pretty much you can be consistent about adjectives coming before the noun. In fact, you can stack long lists of adjectives in front of things.
Yeah. And then there's a comment here from Jay Kim. I'm not sure if that's related to this one. So using wrongly structured sentence is like a foreign originated words. I'm not sure if that was relating to that Zahira comment or something else we were talking about.
Right. I think that was talking about when we were talking about like be and get or going to or will. And I don't know if I would say that it sounds foreign. They're just sometimes less common. Oh, Vitaly said like a decree absolute. That's a good example of an adjective that comes after would be like an attorney general. Like there are a few phrases where the adjective comes after, but it's more like the name. Like no one says, "Oh, the attorney." Oh, and then there's the attorney general. No, the attorney general has just become the name for that thing, right? Yeah. Men at arms, technically at arms is describing the kind of men, right? But very rarely do you see something purely just used as an adjective. When this kind of thing happens, where the adjective comes after, I knew there were examples, but they more become just the name of that thing. Like my mother-in-law, right? We don't think of in-law as being an adjective. It is. But we think of mother-in-law as the whole name for something, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great. Okay, and one more from Zahira, who says, "Are there instances when
this is the same question? Yeah,
that's the same one. Was that the last one? Sorry.
So yes, there are, but they're unusual, and they usually just become that's the name of the thing: attorney general, mother-in-law, men at arms, so on.
Oh, and Pavel here is correcting my Spanish. I think I said roja. It should be rojo.
Auto roja.
Thank you for that. Thank you. Thank you for that. So yeah, that's been great. Now we do have sort of some announcements to make. We've been doing these live streams for like a year and a half now, but at the same, we started because we got together because we wanted to write a lot more content, and we've written this whole course. It's called Inside English. You can find it on the website if you're interested to know more about that. EnglishLanguageClub.co.uk is the website. But then we've found that we're just doing the live streams, and we want to spend more time actually producing content. So moving forward, we're not going to be doing these live streams weekly. We will still do them occasionally, but we are still going to be spending time together. But we're going to be trying to write more videos, and a lot of them are going to be based on the questions that have come up lots of times in the live streams. So we're hoping to build a body of work based on what you guys are telling us you want to know, but we're hoping to give sort of a better, more in-depth, more researched answers to those common questions, rather than just telling you what we can off the top of our heads. But we will use the sort of the what do they call it? The premiere feature, which is a bit like showing a new video as a live stream. So you have the live chat, and I think you can sort of then go into a live stream afterwards. So we are still going to be doing live streams and premieres, which like live streams, but we are not going to be committing to doing these sort of weekly hangouts every week. our focus is going to shift more to producing content. So you will see more of our videos. So you should still make sure that you subscribe and give this video a thumbs up if you can, if you've enjoyed it, which hopefully you have. And we're still going to try and keep the Discord going for now as well. So if you're interested to ask, if you want to ask us a question, or that's a good place to do that. I don't know, Tony, do you want to add anything to that?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, so yeah, we will be back at some point, but probably not next week. But yeah, stay tuned. Make sure you're subscribed, because we will have some really good content coming soon. So yeah, thank you to all of the regulars who've watched us almost religiously the last few years. Susanta and AJ, Vitali. I'm not going to try and thank everybody.
Everyone, yeah. Lots of.
But yeah, you know who you are if you've been. Jack, of course. Jack,
yeah.
Jack,
Lots of people.
Yeah, but no, this is sounding like a goodbye. This is definitely not a goodbye.
No.
This is just a slight change in how we're going to be doing things. So yes, we will see you soon. But for now, that's it for this week. So see you soon. Bye-bye.